So we've talked about the model for improvement as one model. It has 3 questions. All models will send you in these directions to have an aim, to have measures, to then select your changes. And again, we use these because we know that all improvement requires change, but not all change is an improvement. And using these models can help us expedite improvement and also help us predict that the changes that we make will result in improvement. So that's a bit about that. The other thing is we don't use the model in a vacuum, and we actually have a suite of improvement tools that we often use. And so Jessica is going to quickly go over 3 tools that we commonly use in looking in and exploring our processes. And then we want to leave some time to answer questions that you submitted prior, and also maybe any other questions that you've thought of along the way. So Jessica, back to you.
Great, thank you, Sue, appreciate it. So please know that this is meant to be a very high-level overview of these. We can truly spend an hour on each of these tools and really doing a deep dive into them, but it's really letting you know these are available, these are how we have used them, and then really understand that there's a self-learning, obviously, component around that, and really, you know, Google, get online, see different examples of these improvement tools, and start using them. And truly, that's where the value is. You know, I'm a visual learner, and for me to sit down and have these in front of me, I always find is incredibly helpful. So the 3 tools that I'm going to briefly again, like Sue said, talk about is process mapping and flowcharts, action planning, a key diagram, and then the fishbone diagram, which is also a cause and effect diagram as well. So first we're going to talk about process mapping, which is also called flowcharting. And so truly this is used to determine a flow or a sequence of steps and activities that is required to complete a process task. And so we have a diagram that helps us look at this visually and looks at these in a series of events. And I find that it's very helpful to look at efficiency. It helps identify gaps in workflows. And 3 ways to really keep in mind when you're working with process mapping is it can look at a current workflow, so how you're doing something right now. It can look how you would like it to improve, or maybe what you could do to it, or really optimally, you know, looking at best practice, looking at maybe some process mapping around some best practice that's out there, and then using that to kind of guide the process map to what you're doing and the changes that you want to make along the way. So I'll go to the next slide, please. So a few basic steps to keep in mind. So you want to clearly define where the process you're mapping starts and ends. This work, as Sue alluded to, it can get very big very fast, and you want to really keep an eye on scope, because again, the scope can get very big very fast. So again, if you're looking at, for instance, you know, you have a diabetic patient that's coming in the door that you feel your practice is really not doing what it wants to do on foot exams, and so really when the minute the patient enters the office, through the process of the MA rooming the patient, what are all those pieces and people that kind of touch on that, and then when is that going to end? So we'll do it maybe after the provider sees the patient, we'll stop looking at that process, or we're going to do it till the patient walks out the door. Again, determining the steps, then you're going to sit down and sequence them. And again, this takes time, so give yourself time and practice to kind of learn this, how to do this in this thought process, because it really does, the more you do it, the better you get at it, like most things that we do. And then label this map by what type of process it is and date it. I always find that's very helpful. It really allows you to, again, to look at a process its entirety. So this is just we're going to go through some quick examples of what this is. You know, this is looking at a clinic, for instance, and they're looking at ordering drugs and materials. So you can see, you know, that these all kind of fall into place in regards to, you know, they've got the orders are approved. For example, we'll go to the medical warehouse. Do they have these things available? Yes, they do. Okay, then those things are going to go back to the clinic. No, they don't. So then there's a purchase process in place. They got to reach out to vendors and et cetera, as you can see here. So it really maps those processes, and they did it with 2 things, materials and pharmacy and drugs. So You can also have block diagrams, very simplistic, but also help organize your thoughts. Sometimes I usually find in the process when you're starting to process map something, you'll have kind of these big, I call them buckets, or big, you know, however you want to refer to them. And then from there, you'll kind of do that deeper dive from there. So for this, we're just looking at a basic piece where the patient arrives, we registered them, transport them, you know, do they need help getting to where they need to go, and what's within that, and then the assessment. What are we going to look at when that patient has arrived? Are we going to focus this on your physical? Are we going to do a physical exam? Are we going to look at this in regards to you know, someone coming in, they think they may have hepatitis? So again, you're going to this is just your basic piece, but you're going to plug in the processes or the idea that you want to look at. And then next slide. Again, another one, looking at pre-visit planning. So we all know that within these buckets, there's multiple processes that take place. You know, looking at pre-visit planning. So we know with pre-visit planning that there's multiple things that have to go into that. So again, this is just a way to kind of chunk this out into some buckets that you can really look at and then do even more process mapping. This is even more complex. Yep. The next one, looking at this workflow to support developmental screening. And the one thing to take away on this is there are some symbols that mean something within your process mapping. So if you look over to the right, you'll see where there's like an oval for a start. The block is an action process. The, oh my gosh, I'm diagonal. This is a decision, and then the circle is a stop. So really, if you look at these, it's not really just to kind of break it up a little bit. There's actually a thought process behind the symbols, and that's important to recognize as well. So that's kind of just, again, a brief overview about looking at process mapping. And then we're going to dive a little bit now into key driver diagrams. And so when we look at this, we're looking really at, I'm going to have you hit that again, using this improvement tool. This is really kind of that high level to organize theories and ideas in an improvement effort. So really looking at, I find this is really helpful when you're looking at the scope of a project or size of a project to really help the plan and what are the steps that you need to do to reach that aim. So it has primary drivers, has major processes. What are the big components, the big pieces or structures that are going to really contribute towards the aim, the overall global aim that you have. The second piece is the secondary drivers. So again, these are going to be elements or portions of the primary drivers. And these are really what are important and what are they going to do that are going to help impact those primary drivers and again, thus reach that global aim. And then thirdly, we have the specific changes and change concepts. These are what we're going to do, those small tests of change. They're concrete, actionable ideas that we can take to testing. So if you could. Here's an example, and I like the fact that it's blank because it really helps you kind of see this. So again, you've got that global aim, you've got the primary drivers we talked about, those big structural components. We're going to give you a couple quick examples in a minute, secondary drivers, and then the test and change concepts.
Yeah. Jessica, one of the questions that came in before the call, this is Sue, was about what are some strategies that were used with, could be used with patient-centered medical homes? This was one of them. This was one of the ways. Of course, the aim was to become, to get patient-centered medical home designation. And then we had, in Maine, at least as a pilot, we had our 10 core expectations. In essence, they could be your primary drivers, right? We know if working on access, team-based care, electronic health records, there were all of these things, these primary buckets or areas that if we work on will help us. And then we moved into those, okay, so relative to access, for example, what are some of those secondary things that we need to work on? And perhaps some of those were, if we use Mark Murray's, it's working down your backlog, it's figuring out your supply and demand, different things like that. And then the very specific changes they tested and concepts were things like they tested extended hours, they tested weekend hours, they're different, they tested telephone contacts, they tested portals, there were all kinds of changes that they tested. We found driver diagrams very helpful in mapping out the theories and the different changes being tested. So then the team the driver diagrams built from the left-hand side out, so the teams worked it from the right side over, from the specific changes back to the aim. So in answer to that question, that's just one way that we use the driver. And I know you've got some other examples starting right here. Oh, actually, I can talk. You asked me to speak to this. This is the other one. Quality Counts developed a driver diagram for their effort on improving care for children with developmental delays or autism spectrum disorder. So it gave away the teams to look at, okay, we need to look at things in these 4 areas: the identification, the diagnosis, the management, and then the linkages to the community, folks in the community to help us with this. And then we had secondary drivers and some very specific changes attached to those. So in essence, it's a way to map out and test our theory and have it all, for the most part, a page at a glance. And then followed, I think you've got some other examples. Here's another example you had put in.
Yeah, again, we're just going to show you this, I think, and then head on to the next and last example. And Fishbone Diagrams, again, could cause and effect, or the Ishikawa diagram is another name that you might hear for this. And so with this, it's really looking at a problem and then kind of working your way back. So that's just a great way to think of Fishbone. It serves as a base, again, to help with those PDCA cycles or improvement plans. And we're looking at the causes that lead to a given situations, which then is the effect. So really, again, what's the problem and what all the pieces or components, people, everything that impact this. So here's a quick example, again, about a medication area. So we're looking at leadership, equipment, environment, communication, people, and procedures. And then you can see, you know, that's why it has that fish kind of shape to it, how off of those are ways we look at equipment, budget constraints under leadership. You know, you can kind of take a look at this and really get how this really works. So the problem is the medication area, but but all the ways we look at that and all the things that impact that are what we look at with the Fishbone diagram. Again, here's another example. So we've got a lab report missing from the chart. So let's talk about this. So this is seems to be something that keeps happening in there. What is it? And where we know that this is a problem, and we know it's a very important one, and we really need to look at this as a team. So let's talk about this, and let's talk about all the things that impact the fact that this lab report is missing. And 2 things to always remember within this work, and Sue and I really believe this and are very passionate about this, that it's a continuous journey to improve the quality of care for our patients, for your patients, and really celebrate success. You know, that's so important to do in this work, and really truly how we get that buy-in and involvement from everyone that we want to be part of the process. You know, the overall goal that we have in quality improvement is really getting that improved health of our patients and improve their quality of life. So I know sometimes we get into all this work in the QI piece and it's, you know, but really just keep that in perspective, that that's the why that we do all that we do.